if we're going to make more things, we really need to think about how we're going to make these things and how are they going to stand out. I think it's funny to see, at one point, the idea of like taste and discernment and design. Oh, is that actually important in like a world of AI? And now more people are saying like, oh yeah, that's actually really critical. If you can churn out 30 things in, a minute, which one of the 30 things is good?
Welcome to Insights Unlocked, an original podcast from User Testing, where we bring you candid conversations and stories with the thinkers, doers, and builders behind some of the most successful digital products and experiences in the world, from concept to execution.
Welcome to the Insights Unlocked podcast. I'm Nathan Isaacs, Principal Content Marketing Manager at User Testing. Joining us today as host is Jason Giles, User Testing's Vice President of Design. Welcome, Jason.
Hello, Nathan, and hello, all listeners.
And our guest today is Andrew Hogan. Andrew leads Insights at Figma. His research focuses on the digital product and design industry and the ways the most successful teams work. Previously, Andrew spent 7 years at Forrester analyzing the intersection of design and tech. Welcome back to the show, Andrew.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Andrew, we were just talking. It's awesome to see you again. It's been over a year, which in AI terms is like, a decade ago. But, and a lot's happened at Figma too. So like, it's just an exciting time to just kind of catch up. To get us going though, like, from your perspective at Figma, if you can hold 12 months in your brain, like, what do you feel like are some of the big changes that have happened most?
I think the biggest thing is continuation of trends, right? There was more software being created before. There is even more software being created now. I think we're probably certainly on an uptick. More people are recognizing that kind of thing. And then always with that comes the recognition that, if we're going to make more things, we really need to think about how we're going to make these things and how are they going to stand out. I think it's funny to see, at one point, the idea of like taste and discernment and design. Oh, is that actually important in like a world of AI? And now more people are saying like, oh yeah, that's actually really critical. If you can churn out 30 things in, a minute, which one of the 30 things is good? How are you even going to know? And then also we're now a public company and not much has changed on that front, but that is a real thing. Somehow that also happened. I think we also launched 4 new products too, doubled the product line.
It's amazing. I mean, congratulations too. I saw the news around the partnership with, was it Anthropic, right?
We launched the ability to go from Figma. You could always go from Figma to Claude Code, and then now we have the ability to go from Claude Code back into Figma. We call it round tripping design. And you go in and out. That's part of the design process. Where are you going to explore this? What tools are you going to use? It's really fascinating and amazing to see how much is shifting. There's a lot going on.
Well, let's dig into that because we've got a lot to unpack. There's so many reports that have dropped lately. Like a key one, which I always look forward to, is the Figma State of Design, so 2026. But we also had the IDC report drop as well around some of the workforce projections. So first question, we are looking at the evolution of the design profession, or is this just a complete rewrite of it?
I mean, it's an evolution for sure, right? You're always thinking about, this. You've done design in a lot of different contexts at a lot of different companies in different times. And I think for many people who've been through a few technology cycles, the sort of the way in which you work always kinds of, changes. The materials you have to work with. You always need to think about what's the user, what are they trying to accomplish, and the most interesting thing now is how many people are now adopting the practices of design, who are now prototyping. We had a stat we just released. I'm really excited to be able to share this. 60% of Figma makes that were created in the last year were created by non-designers.
Wow.
they're making prototypes in order to convey their intent and what they know. And they're doing that in order to get that communicated more clearly with their teams. And so then as a designer, you're like, oh, wow, I have so much more context to work from because I know things that this person making this, that they don't know, but I also probably just learned something about what they think would be really helpful.
Right.
And so at that point, your job is shifting. The kinds of things you're doing, you're not prototyping, but you're also now working with all this new material. And so it was interesting to see that stat, and then think about the projections that IDC recently shared, that is a Figma study. So I have to say that. Yeah. But IDC, ran a study about the people participating in design, and they found it was going to increase. It's much bigger than you would think. We found that in our own study that we also ran independently. It's one of those things where now more people are involved than ever before. And then as a designer, that does change your job. And as a researcher, that does change your job. But now you can also be involved in their work in a much bigger way too, which is also kind of exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine listeners could probably have a lot of reactions to some of those numbers that are thrown out.
It's true. There are reactions. It goes differently in different contexts.
Yeah. From my perspective, my experience, I mean, the power of prototyping, there's obviously the direct power of being able to align people and solicit feedback, whether that's internally or externally. But I think what is really exciting from my perspective, particularly as a leader, is the opportunity, kind of going back to your point, of eliciting conversation around the right solution to problems. And, have you, as you've talked to others, as I know you do, how should leaders be thinking about what we call craft in this world where now, everybody's participating? Not everybody, but a lot more folks than
many.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very broad, and you guys see this in research too. There are many more non-researchers running research, and you have a very similar kind of challenge. How do you expand what is good and sort of like help people to realize, maybe it's not so good if we ask a leading question in this way. Maybe it's not so good if we don't give people enough time to respond. The other practices in design are very similar in that regard, where some people are really good at it and have spent a lot of time perfecting their craft. And then the question is, how do you put that, document it, make it systematized so that other people can benefit from that? And you get not all of the JSON magic, right? Like you're not replicable or anything, but you get some of the things that are great about JSON, I'm sure. When you are able to document it in a design system, and more people are able to know what is good spacing, what is good hierarchy, when should you use this particular kind of component if we go all the way there? How should you even think about a problem? And so you get to okay, many more people are now participating because they have a need to communicate, they have a need to use good design practices. How do I replicate this? How do I document it? And that is the job of the leader right now, because I think sort of turning off the access, they're going to prototype somewhere in some way. Right. It's just it's like a human need for a certain group of people to make stuff because they have something they want to convey and they want to get done. And I use the research example, but it's also happening across other disciplines too.
Right. I know the active conversations that we're having internally with my team, and this extends to our product organization and even our engineering organization, is what does good look like? What is quality? If everybody is participating in developing a solution to these problems, what is that criteria that we can then scale out to say look, hey, I don't care who's designing it, but here are the requirements. Here are the either the boxes you need to check or the gates that you need to go through to be able to defend or ensure that what we are going to release to customers at least is going through those processes.
Well, and I think the really fascinating thing is in really like, healthy, high performing cultures, this is like a really incredible communication method, right? Because you can convey so much more in a prototype you can interact with. You can say so much more about why this thing needs to happen. And that sort of expansion, like the idea of demos, not memos, is much better than getting like a written document about what should happen. A short written document with some context and then a demo conveys so much more information. And then the reality is you need to have conversations about the like sort of assumptions and information that's embedded in there, what evidence is behind this. Yeah. And that's the thing that the leader has to figure out how to enable that kind of discussion. And that is not an easy task in all places. And it's not easy to convey, hey, this actually isn't quality in certain contexts. I don't want to like understate that.
Yeah, well, and I think it's particularly for the leaders who have been over the years have been able to kind of point to what is their definition of quality or their bar, their taste, to really think, okay, if I'm going to have to scale this, how do I capture that in a way that others can understand, to like really be able to like set that definition. I think it is driving a lot of introspection. I know I'm just speaking for myself of like, okay, if I was to write it down that others could ingest and really understand, I'm like, that requires a lot of contemplation and really thinking of like, okay, how do I kind of capture that?
Well, and it's not just one thing. So we actually asked, what is craft? We asked people in the State of the Designer survey, and we actually had a pretty split, is it thoughtful problem solving? Is it intuitive user experience? Is it polished visual design and details? And you could go look at the responses. It's actually a pretty big split. And that's just like the, 5 or 6 options we could put in that survey.
Right.
It is a complex question that I think does have real implications if you're going to make more software, because you want people to use the software or the experiences that you create, and you want your business to be successful. And if those things are really important and more important than before, this is a really important question to get right and to figure out how to have that conversation within your company. Yeah. In the context that you work in, which is, all of us are in different kinds of situations.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking about what this would look like, because like I said, we're actually trying to create this definition so that we can scale this out in a broader way. And I was just reflecting that, gosh, what I'm writing down now is so contextual to my business, to the culture, to the orientation and like the bias that this particular team or company has versus what it would have been at Ticketmaster or DirecTV or something else. So I think this is it's a really just cool call to arms for leaders in the state of where we're at right now. So to take a step back then, why do you think all of this is happening now?
Yeah. So I made the point about more software being created than ever before. And like folks like IDC or, Gartner are talking about those sorts of topics. And I don't know what the real number is, but I think we can all feel it, that there's many more options, many more features being released more quickly. And so when we worked with IDC on this study about the workforce that would be involved in design, that was one of the big things that they called out. And that would lead to increased competition within greater need to differentiate. How do you stand out if there's more, new players coming in? And then also, well, you have an entirely new set of technologies and capabilities that you could integrate. How do you even understand what's possible, which is very different than when we talked about this topic a year ago. There's even more capabilities. I think we were sort of past the let's just dump a prompt box into everything. And all of us are trying to figure out, well, what else could we do other than putting a prompt box on top of this?
Yeah.
And then I think there's increasing realization that there's new use cases that can be developed because it is faster and often cheaper to create software now than it was before. So you're like, oh, I could find a way to work on this problem that I've never worked on. And so IDC essentially found that these trends, some people call that Javon's paradox. That's become a really hot topic. As things get cheaper, you find new uses for them. And that then means that if all this is going on, you've got to think about how to make this like infrastructure, a system within a company that's repeatable, that's supportive to the groups in it. You've got to think about the new parties that have never, maybe participated in design before. How can they work on it? Which then calls for more people who are skilled at design to help make those things even happen. And it's a really fascinating set of trends. In my head, it's been rolling around as like the new design equation, where it is no longer, you have essentially increasing people involved, increasing amount of things being created, increasing possibilities, and then working on increasingly more important challenges and more valuable challenges. And that equation then drives a huge amount of like interest in how you can systematize this. And also not like lose the magic. Sometimes you just have incredible human breakthroughs in this process.
Yeah, 100%. So with that context then, as we think about building out the teams, what are those capabilities that this next generation of companies needs to really be successful? Do you have some perspective on that?
I'm going to tell you some stuff from the data, but I think you probably have some reflections from your own experience. And you said next generation of companies. It's also the current generation of companies, right? Like I think we're all trying to build for the future, but you don't just start from zero. You have an existing set of customers, existing products, existing teams. So in the hiring study research that we just did, the demand for designers is up. The hiring managers, mostly told us that demand was either steady or rising for their teams. And they told us that they wanted people who could really step into a position and figure out how to integrate a bunch of complex parts and really, difficult stakeholders and new technologies and all these things that like senior people who have done this before are really, really skilled at. That's what you think of. And then underneath that, the demand for hiring junior designers was significantly below the demand for hiring senior designers. And so I would guess, Jason, that you have been looking for people who have done this before and who are experts at integrating complex systems and have a long track record of experience.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I will say yes. And I'm also looking for, I'm just going to call them AI natives because, and I know the jobs report doesn't say this per se, but I just kind of like, I'm old, right? Like when the internet came, you had people with that kind of orientation that were entering in the way they were approaching problem solving. And I think there's a little bit of inertia that I'm having to kind of manage with like the traditional way of thinking. So I do think, and I know like it's a hard ask, like, to actually think of AI natives, but to really bring in that perspective. Now, of course, to bring somebody seasoned and to really be able to articulate like the defensibility of the decisions that AI influenced, that becomes super critical. But
what you're really talking about there is a mix. And that I think is a really good recommendation for everybody to think about, because you're both in trouble if you're looking for people who have only ever worked in a generative AI world, and you're in trouble if you're only looking for people who have done something for 10, 15 years. And I heard there's this amazing anecdote that I heard of the value of having someone come in and say, hey, I just learned this like amazing new thing that I could do. And like, I'm just like I don't even know why I'm doing it. I'm going to show this whole team. And that often comes from someone who is just so excited to be learning something new versus someone who is like, I've been through this before. I've seen this. I kind of know how to approach it. And it does show up in the data. What shows up in the data is a demand for AI like proficiency with the tools and with designing AI native products. Hiring managers are definitely looking for that. Both of those were over 70%. But nobody knows how to look for that right now.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like how do you test someone's AI tool proficiency when the tools also change completely?
Yeah.
Are you just asking them like, do you use Figma Make and do you like it? And so you end up with hiring managers looking for like side projects and other indicators and signals,
Totally.
which of course makes it hard as a hiring manager to even sift through the pile of, applicants that you have.
Yeah.
Anyway,
All the AI generated resumes.
That also a thing. So we need some software to make it so you could sift through the AI generated resumes that are being generated by the software.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With those numbers though, I think it's interesting because, so it's encouraging, like, hey, like they're hiring, and maybe we're hiring senior at this point, because bringing in that capability and being able to point and shoot in this context makes sense. But I will just speak for myself. As I talk to designers out in the industry, I don't feel like they feel like we're in this place where there's opportunity. Do you kind of get any kind of sense of what the disconnect there is?
So I think there's a couple of things that are potentially happening. One of them is, a comparison to other sorts of contexts that they've experienced. So, in past years, one of them is sort of the point that you and I just talked about, where it's hard for hiring managers. So the sort of experience of applying and trying to get through a process is also probably more difficult. There's everyone. Whenever there's technological change, there's sort of uncertainty about what skills do I need and how is this all going to work out. So I think that's part of it. It honestly showed up in the data too. Like, the hiring managers would say at their company, the demand for hiring designers was up, but they didn't necessarily perceive that the overall market itself was, doing great. So it's like in their context, they knew that they were hiring. Their belief about the broader context was not as good. And there is certainly some, feelings based interaction between those things. If you know people who are looking, it's tough. They're not feeling great about the overall situation, even as there's all this evidence that the demand is up. There's, the taste is more important than ever. Discernment is more important than ever. The skills that are being valued are it's certainly very high for AI design, designing the products, changing the process to incorporate AI. So it's like this confluence of factors that I think is not making people feel maybe as good as they should based on what the data would say. And that, that's the magic of qual and quant. Maybe the magic in that context is not the right one. That is the value of qual and quant, to bounce those two things off of each other.
As you talk to designers, like we talked about some of the criteria of like, hey, as hiring managers, I'm looking for folks with this fluency. Are there just some of the basics that you're recommending design teams to be focusing on to really have that experience? And
yeah, I mean, I think a really strong design system has never been more important, right? If you're going to scale and have more people participating, having them work from a strong foundation. And then that means who are the designers who can help you design systems. That's a certain kind of profile, and a certain kind of person that does that work, likes that work, is valuable at that work. I think the other one is just like sort of play and exploration, and the desire to do that is really important right now. Which is, I feel like some people just do this. They just find these pockets of time, and then they're just like, I did this in this completely different way than we've ever done it before. I don't know why. I just thought I would try it. And, they're often like banging stuff out in Figma Make that you didn't think that you could do, or wouldn't think to do. And those people are really valuable right now too. And they often have like side projects that you're like they're doing. And you're like, as a leader, should I be letting them do this? This is even good.
Yeah. It's so funny. Yeah. So I talked to one of my writers today, and I told her, I said, hey, guess who's using the most Figma Make credits on our entire team? She looks a little sheepish, and she's like, is it me? And I said, yeah, I'm like, and that's awesome. And I'm like, tell me more about this. She's like, well, I find that like if I can get people on the same page really quickly. And when at the beginning, and so it's alignment, I'm like, oh, perfect. She's like, but I think in narratives, and I used to have to wait for designers to kind of build this thing. But now I can just quickly whip something out. So I'm like, that's perfect. Awesome. But then she said, and I'm building an app. And I'm like, oh, tell me more. And what she told me was not about the app. It was what she has learned as she's tried to do this, the mistakes that she made. Oh, I should have focused on this. I got back to your point. Like, oh, I should have really thought about like the design system and how, but the learning that takes from natural curiosity. Clearly, I never asked her to build an app. And so, it was such a great example of maybe the mind shift and mindset that I think is going to be really important these days.
I mean, it's an incredible story. It's exactly what the sort of thing that we see. And, we have this stat, 56% of non-designers are doing a lot of design tasks, and they're just stepping out of whether a writer, you probably think of her as a designer too, whether they're a product manager, whether they're a marketer, they're just like stepping out into things that they haven't been able to do before because the accessibility is there. And then you usually end up with an appreciation for the other field that wasn't there before, or maybe wasn't the depth of understanding it's really hard to make a design system.
Yeah, right.
It is a complex, you see why they are so valuable, the people who make them, and why design systems are so valuable. When you try to do something either without it or make your own, or and I just think it's a really interesting thing about work today, where you have access to these other fields that it doesn't make you an expert in those other fields, but it makes you able to have better conversations about them.
Well, and
and I love that. I love that example you shared.
Well, yeah. And what's interesting too is that like in the process of playing with these tools, sometimes not only appreciation for the other disciplines and the arts, but also like there are some things that you can't skip. Like, it's so easy to go into these tools and be like, oh, create this experience, and I want it to do this and this and this. And then you realize, oh, wait a minute. I need to think about who am I designing this for? What are the requirements? Right. What is the scope? I think it's also reinforcing firsthand of like some of the fundamentals of product design to have an appreciation for, like the tools make it easier, but there's still fundamental things that need to happen as part of this. And just because maybe it's easier to do, you just kind of can't skip it.
How do you want them to feel? And in order to know how you want them to feel, you need to know what they feel before they're using it, some sense, what they think of as success afterwards. You all of a sudden then go, well, maybe I should talk to some people who use this thing.
Right.
Maybe I should put it in front of them and see what they say. Maybe I should then iterate based on the thing that I've just heard, whether it's in code, whether it's in Figma, whether, it's so funny because you basically end up going, oh, I should probably run like a full sort of design process and do all of the steps and it's really valuable. And then you go, oh, maybe I could ask better questions. Oh, maybe I could think about this animation a little bit better. I just think this is why you end up with the logic that we have, which is design is everyone's business. You could probably say research and customer understanding is everyone's business. And you kind of can't skip it, even though you thought maybe you could if you were outside of these fields before. You have an appreciation for it when you start doing things that are adjacent to why it's important. And more things are going to be made, and some of them are not going to be very good, and they're not going to understand the customer or the user. And then we're going to interact with things that really do get it because they were made by somebody who lives in that context and or fully understands it. And you're going to be like, wow, this is awesome. I need to tell everyone. I'm willing to pay for this. I'm just like, I'm fascinated by the moment that we're in, and it makes me so excited about design and research and all of these kinds of related fields. Because once you interact with things that don't work very well, you start to appreciate the things that do.
Yeah. And it kind of touches on, so when I saw the report, one of the things I cringed at a little bit was
let's hear it.
Because you asked, what does craft mean to you? And I was like, oh, okay, what a great question. And then, I don't want to judge, but it was like a large portion was like, oh, it's the fit and finish. It's how it feels.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. Like, don't get me wrong. But what we're talking about, like when I think of craft, is the craft of problem solving. And I was hoping more were like, can you talk a little bit more about those findings? And
Yeah. So in the State of Designer study, we did ask, what do you think of as craft? And I hinted at that. I've hinted at that in earlier in this interview and in the rest of this conversation. We also asked about what are the skills that you're hiring for. And at the top was visual design, which is kind of exactly what you're talking about here. And I think one of the reasons why that appears is because those are the things that are often skipped that actually, in totality, if they're intentionally done, create a feeling in using a product that is, I think, bigger than the details. I can see from your face, you disagree. And I think that's okay, because we offered room for that in the question, but I just wouldn't skip over something that you innately know how to do that other people do not maybe know as well. And I think if for some people, if they reduce it to polish and fit and finish, that kind of diminishes it. But I also think there's something to be said for like the exact right animation and feeling, the exact right typography, the exact right, color palette, that are things that are very difficult to automate and replicate because they're so innate to you and what you've done that you sort of like, well, of course this is important. Of course this is. And I think for a whole lot of other people, those are very new, different, difficult skills. But I don't know what you think about any of that.
I will grant you, and I like your explanation. Here's why I have the visceral reaction.
Okay.
Is because actually AI is pretty good at making something convincing looking, and it sounds confident. Like the writing is good. Like the interaction patterns make sense. And so my big fear, just personal fear, is that it can lull you because it looks good, but it is good. And I'm just so afraid of designers thinking like, oh, this is the value I'm getting. I take it the last, 20% to really make that emotional connection. I'm like, but is it doing its job?
I think we're saying sort of the same things. And I think the reason I think we're saying sort of, that makes total sense. You're afraid of people sort of turning off their critical thinking or just letting it kind of like go along. I think the thing I would consider is that when you can pull it through from the beginning of who is this for? How do I want them to feel? How do they feel, before they're using it and after they're using it? What problem is it really solving? And when you can pull that through to all of the other decisions, I think you get to something that's more powerful. And so I think we're actually saying some similar things.
I just hope
where it is
designers who understand that's their job, is to be,
they might have to
pull that,
but they might have to tell people. They might have to tell people that, hey, you haven't actually solved this core problem. You're asking me to polish this thing up for you so we can ship it. But there's actually something bigger here. And I think that's part of where leadership comes in, at trying to create the context for people to know enough to be able to ask those questions, to have the room to ask those questions, to know that they have the permission to ask those questions. And I think it's a valid concern. Like, are you just going to get, prototypes that you're asked to polish up? Or are you going to be able to go back to like the fundamental assumptions of the problem you're solving and the person that's using it? And it's possible that, that designers, researchers may have to reach further up and influence the process earlier through, there's all kinds of stakeholder things and influencing and all of those things that are actually become really important, that I just think you might have to do in order to influence more than just like the last 20%.
Yeah. I think the good thing about the survey results and that particular one that tweaked me a bit was that it reminded me I've got a job to do, like as a design leader. And
do you not want it to be like, would you prefer it if the answer had been 0%? Because we also asked for top 3. So to be fair, like, the people had an option of choosing this and other things. Should the polish not actually appear as one of the top couple things? Would that be better? And I don't know the answer to this.
I mean, just me personally, it would have been nice, because I have spent the past, coming on 30 years trying to articulate that design does not equate fit and finish and polish. And so that was just a little bit like, really? Like and I get it. The question was around craft, not what is design. But
I get your point. I totally get the point. And then I feel the pain of like the work that basically all of design has done to like expand this to the thing that we know. Yeah. I do think it's more understood than it was in the past, that design is much bigger than fit and finish. But I also know that people get given a prototype and say, hey, can you polish this up so we can ship it?
Yes.
That is a real thing that absolutely happens.
And don't get me wrong, like I'm the first one to appreciate the thoughtfulness of like the emotional experience on the interaction. It's just, it got so much attention for so long that,
it's in there. Visual design was the top skill. Your craft, the visual polish was one of the top 3 results. I think if I was to, I'm not going to tell you to feel differently, but I think if I was to just give you one thing to hang on to, it's that it's not that it doesn't matter. It's probably just like your feelings about, not wanting people to sort of lose the influence, designers, researchers, other people who care deeply about like the human condition and how people feel, to lose the influence over the whole process in pursuit of, and I think that is worth everybody listening, thinking about, and talking about, that it isn't that you sort of like throw this other part of it away. It's that it's something bigger too. Yeah. And it's potentially even the search for what is a good answer. Which might also include polishing things up to make sure that they do everything they need to do. Because if that doesn't happen, it also feels bad.
Yeah, 100%. I think we're aligned. I think
that's what I don't think we're actually that misaligned. No. I think it is more like it's a reality of the context that we all work within that I think is, going to be ongoing.
Agreed. Okay, so let's get back to some of the other findings. I was mentioning beforehand that we actually are about to release a study too that talks about confidence that designers have in what they're actually delivering. And one of the interesting findings was that earlier in the process, they're actually feeling really confident about like the AI generated solutions. But as you get later on into the process, they're like, "Oh, the confidence starts to fade." And to circle back around, then, like, what are your thoughts on, should we be afraid of that false confidence that this AI potentially introduces?
I think we should be thoughtful about it. And there's a lot of words you could pick there, right? I think for one thing, it's enabled people to have better conversations than they could ever have before, right? If you run like a supply chain and you can now tell people that this particular part of the process would be so much better if it worked more like this prototype that I have just given you.
Yeah.
And I think it really goes back to taking that person's input as, you know, the same sort of like comment or feedback that they would have put in a form before, but it would have been so much less fidelity about the problem they were actually having.
Yeah.
And then you could potentially say, well, what about this? And you could actually watch them prompt it. And you could actually like here almost do like a research interview as they're building like a new version of a prototype or as they're refining it. And so it's not so much that we should pause using this capability. I think it's that we should be thoughtful about using both the outputs and the process and the, you know, all of the other steps of it. And so I think that's why I use the word thoughtful. And that goes for the people listening to this. That goes for the people who do not listen to this and who are potentially not being super thoughtful about how they're approaching it. Because I think that's what you're trying to create, is just a little bit of like inquiry and consideration and digging, potentially with, you know, user customer research to shape it. Because I don't know that it's so bad that something looks like it could be real. In some ways, that actually lets you look at it in the full context that it would be used in and allows people to not be distracted by the other things that are going on. I know there's many different schools of thought on this, whether you should be in wireframes for longer, whether it should look more polished or not. But I think it just gives you like a communication tool to get like real depth with somebody that maybe you wouldn't have gotten before.
Well, and ironically, to bring it back to craft, I'm going to kind of call my own bullshit. One of the most amazing experiences that I had in my career was I was at Xbox. We're designing the platform, and we had design developers on staff sat right with the designers. And what that meant was that multiple times a day, we push the build up onto the TV with our remote controls, and we felt it. And those ideas that we thought felt good and maybe, you know, in a wireframe or whatever, we're like, oh, this doesn't flow actually, or this, I'm getting lost. Okay, let's go. And so,
and now everybody can do it, Jason. And that is like, but you got to be thoughtful.
Yes, exactly. Because it can elevate the craft in that.
Right. You have to be thoughtful. You have to know that there are going to be a lot of iterations. You have to know that the thing that you sort of like land on is maybe not the thing in the end. This is why I think that the idea of design round tripping is so important, because you took it to code back to design in the same way that you're now able to do, except you can do it a lot faster with many more iterations. You can learn a lot more. And I think that's something to be harnessed by people who are like willing to be thoughtful about it.
I love that. And I 100% agree. The speed that these allow us to do and the fidelity, it's just fluid now. And so I think it changes the way that we think about the possibilities of these, the conversation, the collaboration, whether that's with each other, with our developers, or with customers. And that's it's incredibly exciting. Okay. Andrew, once again, I really, really enjoy the opportunity to talk. The report that you've put out, the findings that we're seeing, you've just really brought it to life. And if some of our listeners want to find out more about the state of design in 2026, how would they go about that?
Figma.com/reports. There's multiple studies that we've dropped. I post on LinkedIn a lot. Almost none of it is AI generated. Most of it is deeply proofread by AI. But I try really hard to handcraft all of those words and letters, and I would love to interact with people there. I just love talking about research. Like, it's just an incredible opportunity and thing for all of us to reflect on our contexts and the broader context and industry we work in. So love to interact with people there. And maybe check out Config later this year too.
Amazing. Will do. Andrew, thanks once again. And with that, we'll let you go.
Thanks for having me.